The shortness factor. Hello, hello everyone. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
All right, all the way to the last row. Good, because this is where I will be keeping everything. And gosh, I'm just thrilled to be here and volunteer to do it. Nobody dragged me. And, all these years, I'm reading a piece that I wrote in 1973. And I was just saying to my spouse partner that I think that it starts to deconstruct some of the older mythologies, and I've realized the new narrative movement carried on with doing that, of clearing a path so that new holistic mythologies can arise from that, and I find that to be an exciting idea. So my question, is, here is this poem. It's, how old is that? It's so old, I can't even add up the decades. The word intersectionality was still 20 years away. But it's a woman who's talking to death, and I'm just going to read it. 1. Testimony in trials that never got heard. My lover's teeth are white geese flying above me. My lover's muscles are rope ladders under my hands. We were driving home slow, my lover and I, across the Long Bay Bridge one February midnight, when midway over in the far left lane, I saw a strange scene. One small young man standing by the rail, and in the lane itself, parked straight across as if it could stop anything, a large young man upon a stalled motorcycle, perfectly relaxed as if he'd stopped at a hamburger stand. He was wearing a pea coat and Levi's, and he had his head back, roaring. You could almost hear the laugh. It was so real. Look at that fool, I said, in the middle of the bridge like that, a very womanly remark. Then we heard the meaning of the noise of metal on a concrete bridge at 50 miles an hour, and the far left lane filled up with a big car that had a motorcycle jammed on its front bumper, like the whole thing would explode. The friction sparks shot up bright orange for many feet into the air, and the racket still sets my teeth on edge. When the car stopped, we stopped parallel, and Wendy headed for the call box while I ducked across those 6 lanes like a mouse in the bowling alley. Are you hurt? I said. The middle-aged driver had the grayest black face. I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. What happened? Then I remembered. Somebody, I said, was on the motorcycle. I ran back, 1 block, 2 blocks. The space for walking on the bridge is maybe 18 inches. Whoever engineered this arrogance. In the dark, stiff wind, it seemed I would be pushed over the rail, would fall down screaming onto the hard surface of the bay. But I did not. I found the tall young man who thought he owned the bridge, now lying on his stomach, head cradled in his broken arm. He had glasses on, but somewhere he had lost most of his Levi's. Where were they? And his shoes. 2 short cuts on his buttocks, that was the only mark except his thin white seminal tubes were all strung out behind. No child left in him, and he looked asleep. I plucked wildly at his wrist, then put it down. There were 2 long-haired women holding back the traffic just behind me with their bare hands. The machines came down like mad bulls. I was scared, much more than usual. I felt easily squished, like the earthworms crawling on a busy sidewalk after the rain. I wanted to leave, and met the driver walking back. The guy is dead. I gripped his hand. The wind was going to blow us off the bridge. Oh my God, he said. Haven't I had enough trouble in my life? He raised his head and for a second was enraged and yelling at the top of the bridge. I was just driving home. His head fell down. My God, and now I've killed somebody. I looked down at my own pea coat and Levi's. Then over at the dead man's friend who was howling and blubbering, what they would call hysteria in a woman. "It isn't possible," he wailed, but it was possible. It was indeed accomplished and unfeeling, snoring in its peacoat and without its Levi's on. He died laughing. That's a fact. I had a woman waiting for me in her car and in the middle of the bridge. "I'm frightened," I said. "I'm afraid," he said. "Stay with me, please don't go. Stay with me, be my witness." "No," I said, "I'll be your witness later." And I took his name and number. "But I can't stay with you. I'm too frightened of the bridge. Besides, I have a woman waiting and no license and no taillights." So I left, as I have left so many of my lovers. We drove home shaking, Wendy's face grayer than any white person's I have ever seen. Maybe he beat his wife. Maybe he once drove taxi and raped a lover of mine. How to know these things? We do each other in. That's a fact. Who will be my witness? Death wastes our time with drunkenness and depression. Death, who keeps us from our lovers. He had a woman waiting for him. I found out when I called the number days later. "Where is he?" she said. "He's disappeared." "He'll be all right," I said. "We could have hit the guy as easy as anybody. It wasn't anybody's fault. They'll know that." Women so often say dumb things like that. They teach us to be sweet and reassuring and say ignorant things because we don't invent the crime, the punishment, the bridges. That same week, I looked into the mirror and nobody was there to testify. How clear. An unemployed queer woman makes no witness at all. Nobody at all was there for those two questions. What does she do? And who is she married to? I am the woman who stopped on the bridge, and this is the man who was there. Our lovers' teeth are white geese flying above us, but we ourselves are easily squished. Keep the women small and weak and off the street and off the bridges. That's the way, brother. One day I will leave you there, as I have left you there before, working for death. We found out later what we left him to. 6 big policemen answered the call, all white and no child in them. They put the driver up against his car and beat the hell out of him. "What did you kill that poor kid for? You motherfucking..." That's a fact. Death only uses violence when there is any kind of resistance. The rest of the time, a slow wear down will do. They took him to 4 different hospitals till they got a drunk test report to fit their case and held him 5 days in jail without a phone call. How many lovers have we left? There are so many contradictions to the game as there are players. A woman is talking to death, though talk is cheap and life takes a long time to make right. He got a cheesy lawyer who had him cop a plea, 15 to 20 instead of life. Did I say life? The arrogant young man who thought he owned the bridge and fell asleep on it. He died laughing. That's a fact. The driver sits out his time off the street somewhere. Does he have the most vacant of eyes? Will he die laughing? 2. They don't have to lynch the women anymore. Death sits on my doorstep cleaning his revolver. Death cripples my feet and sends me out to wait for the bus alone, then comes by driving a taxi. The woman on our block with 6 young children has the most vacant of eyes. Death sits in her bedroom, loading his revolver. They don't have to lynch the women very often anymore, although they used to. The Lord and his men went through the villages at night, beating and killing every woman caught outdoors. The European witch trials took away the independent people 2 different villages, after the trials were through that year, had left in them each a one living woman. One. What were those other women up to? Had they run over someone? Stopped on the wrong bridge? Did they have teeth like any kind of geese? Or children in them? 3. This woman is a lesbian, be careful. In the military hospital where I worked as a nurse's aide, the walls of the halls were lined with howling women waiting to deliver or to have some parts removed. One of the big private rooms contained the general's wife who needed a wart taken off her nose. We were instructed to give her special attention, not because of her wart or her nose, but because of her husband, the general. As many women as men die, and that's a fact. At work there was one friendly patient, already claimed a young woman burnt apart with X-ray. She had long white tubes instead of openings, rectum, bladder, vagina. I combed her hair. It was my job. But she took care of me as if nobody's touch could spoil her. Ho, ho, death, ho, death. Have you seen the twinkle in the dead woman's eye? When you are a nurse's aide, someone suddenly notices you and yells about the patient's bed and tears the sheets apart so you can do it over and over, while the patient waits doubled over in her pain for you to make the bed again, and no one ever looks at you, only at what you do not do. Here, General, hold this soldier's bedpan for a moment. Hold it for a year. Then we'll promote you to making his bed. We believe you wouldn't make such messes if you had to clean up after them. That's a fantasy. This woman is a lesbian, be careful. When I was arrested and being thrown out of the military, the order went out. Don't anybody speak to this woman. And for those 3 long months, almost nobody did. The day room, when I entered it, fell silent till I had gone. They were afraid. They knew the wind would blow them over the rail. The cops would come. The water would run into their lungs. Everything I touched was spoiled. They were my lovers, those women, but nobody had taught us to swim. I drowned. I took 3 or 4 others down when I signed the confession of what we had done together. No one will ever speak to me again. I read this somewhere, I wasn't there. In World War II, the US Army had invented some floating amphibian tanks and took them over to the coast of Europe to unload them. The landing ships all drawn up in a fleet and everybody watching. Each tank had a crew of 6 and there were 25 tanks. The first went down the landing planks and sank. The second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the 6th went down and sank. They weren't supposed to sink. The engineers had made a mistake. The crews looked around wildly for the order to quit, but none came. And in the sight of thousands of men, each 6 crewmen saluted his officers, battened down his hatch in turn, and drove into the sea and drowned until all 25 tanks were gone. Did they have vacant eyes, die laughing, or what? What did they talk about, those men, as the water came in? Was the general their lover? 4, a mock interrogation. Have you ever held hands with a woman? Yes, many times. Women about to deliver, women about to have breasts removed, wombs removed, miscarriages, women having epileptic fits, having asthma, cancer, women having breast bone marrow sucked out of them by nervous or indifferent interns, women with heart conditions, who were vomiting, overdosed, depressed, drunk, lonely, to the point of extinction, women who had been run over, beaten up, deserted, starved, women who had been bitten by rats, and women who were happy, who were celebrating, who were dancing with me in large circles, or alone, women who were climbing mountains or up and down walls or trucks or roofs and needed a boost up, or I did, women who simply wanted to hold my hand because they liked me, some women who wanted to hold my hand because they liked me better than anyone. These were many women? Yes, many. What about kissing? Have you kissed any women? I have kissed many women. When was the first woman you kissed with serious feeling? The first woman ever I kissed was Josie, who I had loved at such a distance for months. Josie was not only beautiful, she was tough and handsome too. Josie had black hair and white teeth and strong brown muscles. Then she dropped out of school unexplained. When she came back for one day only to finish the term, and there was a child in her. She was all shame, pain, and defiance. Her eyes were dark as the water under a bridge, and no one would talk to her. They laughed and threw things at her. In the afternoon, I walked across the front of the class and looked deep into Josie's eyes, and I picked up her chin with my hand because I loved her. Because nothing like her trouble would ever happen to me, because I hated it that she was pregnant and unhappy and an outcast. We were 13. You didn't kiss her? How does it feel to be 13 and having a baby? You didn't actually kiss her? Not in fact. You have kissed other women? Yes, many. Some of the finest women I know I have kissed. Women who were lonely, women I didn't know and didn't want to, but kissed because that was a way to say yes. We are still alive and lovable, though separate. Women who recognized the loneliness in me, women who were hurt, I confess, to kissing the top of a 55-year-old woman's head in the snow in Boston, who was hurt more deeply than I've ever been hurt. And I wanted her as a very few people have wanted me. I wanted her and me to own and control and run the city we lived in, to staff the hospital I knew would mistreat her, to drive the transportation system that had betrayed her, to patrol the streets, controlling the men who would murder or disfigure or disrupt us, not accidentally with machines, but on purpose, because we are not allowed out on the street alone. Have you ever committed any indecent acts with women? Yes, many. I am guilty of allowing suicidal women to die before my eyes, or in my ears, or under my hands, because I thought I could do nothing. I am guilty of leaving a prostitute who held a knife to my friend's throat to keep us from leaving, because we would not sleep with her. We thought she was old and fat and ugly. I'm guilty of not loving her who needed me. I regret all the women I have not slept with or comforted, who pulled themselves away from me for lack of something I had not the courage to fight for us, our life, our planet, our city, our meat and potatoes, our love. These are indecent acts, lacking courage, lacking a certain fire behind the eyes, which is the symbol, the raised fist, the sharing of resources, the resistance that tells death he will starve for lack of the fat of us, our extra. Yes, I have committed acts of indecency with women, and most of them were acts of omission. I regret them bitterly. 5. Bless this day, O cat, our house. I was allowed to go 3 places growing up, she said. 3 places, no more. There was a straight line from my house to school, a straight line from my house to church, a straight line from my house to the corner store. Her parents thought something might happen to her, but nothing ever did. My lover's teeth are white geese flying above me. My lover's muscles are rope ladders under my hands. We are the river of life and fat of the land. Death, do you tell me I cannot touch this woman? If we use each other up on each other, that's a little bit less for you. A little bit less for you, ho death, ho ho death. Bless this day, O cat, our house. Help me be not such a mouse. Death tells the woman to stay home and then breaks in the window. I read this somewhere. I wasn't there. In feudal Europe, if a woman committed adultery, her husband would sometimes tie her down, catch a mouse, and trap it under a cup on her bare belly until it gnawed itself out. Now, are you afraid of mice? 6. Dressed as I am. A young man once called me names in Spanish. A woman who talks to death is a dirty traitor. Inside a hamburger joint and dressed as I am. A young man once called me names in Spanish. Then he called me queer and slugged me. First I thought the ceiling had fallen down, but there was the counterman making a ham sandwich, and there was I spread out on his counter. For God's sake, I said when I could talk, this guy's beating me up. Can't you call the police or something? Can't you stop him? He looked up from working on his sandwich, which was my sandwich. I had ordered it. He liked the way I looked. There's a payphone right across the street, he said. I couldn't listen to the Spanish language for weeks afterward without feeling the most murderous of urges. The simple association of one thing to another, so damned simple. The next day I went to the police station to become an outraged citizen. 6 big policemen stood in the hall, all white and dressed as they do. They were well pleased with my story, pleased at what had gotten beat out of me, so I left them laughing, went home fast, and locked my door. For several nights, I fantasized the scene again, this time grabbing a chair and smashing it over the bastard's head, killing him. I called him a spick and killed him. My face healed. This didn't. No child in me. Now, when I remember, I think maybe he was Josie's baby. All the chickens come home to roost. All of them. 7. Death and disfiguration. One Christmas Eve, my lovers and I, we left the bar, driving home slow. There was a woman lying in the snow by the side of the road. She was wearing a bathrobe and no shoes. Where were her shoes? She had turned the snow pink under her feet. She was an Asian woman, didn't speak much English, but she said a taxi driver beat her up and raped her, throwing her out of his care. What on earth was she doing there on a street she helped to pay for, but didn't own? Doesn't she know to stay home? I am a pervert, therefore I've learned to keep my hands to myself in public. But I was so drunk that night, I actually did something loving. I took her in my arms, this woman, until she could breathe right. And my friends were perverts too. They touched her too. We all touched her. You're going to be all right, we lied. She started to cry. I'm 55 years old, she said, and that said everything. Six big policemen answered the call. No child in them. They seemed afraid to touch her, then grabbed her like a corpse and heaved her on their metal stretcher into the van, crashing and clumsy. She was more frightened than before. They were cold and bored. Don't leave me, she said. She'll be all right, they said. We left, as we have left all our lovers. as all lovers leave all lovers, much too soon to get the real loving done. Eight. A mock interrogation. Why did you get into the cab with him, dressed as you are? I wanted to go somewhere. Did you know what the cab driver might do if you got into the cab with him? I just wanted to go somewhere. How many times did you get into the cab with him? I don't remember. If you don't remember, how do you know it happened to you? Sorry, I just... Thank you.
Nine. Hey, you death, ho and ho, poor death. Our lovers' teeth are white geese flying above us. Our lovers' muscles are rope ladders under our hands, even though no women yet go down to the sea in ships, except in their dreams. Only the arrogant invent a quick and meaningful end for themselves, of their own choosing. Everyone else knows how very slow it happens, how the woman's existence bleeds out her years, how the child shoots up at 10 and is arrested and old, how the man carries a murderous shell within him and passes it on. We are the fat of the land, and we all have our list of casualties. To my lovers I bequeath the rest of my life. I want nothing left of me for you, ho death, except some fertilizer for the next batch of us, who do not hold hands with you, who do not embrace you, who try not to work for you or sacrifice themselves, or trust or believe you. Ho, ignorant death, how do you know we happen to you? Wherever our meat hangs on our own bones for our own use, your pot is so empty, death. Ho, death, you shall be poor.
Opportunity to read this. I'm sorry I faint in the middle of it. I faint every time my friend Bob's in the room. A lot of other times. And I'm happy to say I'm reading from a new collection of 9-part poems, and it starts off with this one, and then there are 6 others, and it's from Red Hen Press called Hanging on Our Own Bones. Thank you so very much.
As well. Now Carla Harryman.
I was devastated before you started reading, so I don't know what state of mind I'm in at the moment. Thank you. This is from an essay called The Essay is Noise. I'm reading excerpts, and it's for Nayland and Matthias. Does not permit its domain to be prescribed. And thus we begin with a story or folly, two friends, a second and third, chance encounters, missing persons, heartfelt alienation. We enter this tale made from unpractical purposes at the intersection between desire and institution, a fantasy, Freie Universität. The artists plan a takeover but dread the loss of their fluid identities, which are contingent on consigning their thoughts to paper. If they build an institution, they will be teachers, architects of ideas for the rest of their lives. What's more unnerving is the institution might outlive them. They are ambivalent about success. Desire loses its contours under the threat of longevity. The era was named the architecture of the funeral. Undecided about their designs for a future utopian edifice, Carla and her friend Kathy, or Memory, leave them on a table in a gallery space in San Francisco to take pleasure in the distortions of street life. Glass and fog of urban space is their refuge against the common world of labor. For brief moments of time, they experience a friendship untethered from the competing interests of work and the dream of projected new meanings, even if such pauses do not last. Their conversation drifts anywhere, not lighting on anything for as long as it takes them to climb Grant Street on the Hudson-Fuller side. The fog dissipates, revealing white environs tempered by window boxes, window displays, and unassuming trimmings. Storefront businesses and salons shimmer with commerce on the uphill approach to the red Chinatown gate. Sustained by stolen, unremunerated time, their fantasy future institution cannot be in one location. Utopian desire in its erotic mode does not have an objective and can mute the will to build a school or enter one. The disciplinarity of hard currency and institution needs shifts to the contingency of buoyant impulse or portable artifice. Go through the portal of an actual establishment of your own design and you'll never come back out, warns the toy libido bopping around in the awe-inspiring rotunda Memory has fabricated with Carla's encouragement to house the Minotaur stationed in the center of a potential work. They agree the Minotaur is desirable and survives the slayer, but does the beast ever surface? Is the labyrinth still intact? Wants to blow open what cannot be absorbed in narration. Portal of a fictive mood, inconclusive days, meandering companionship and reprieve from consequential acts, doing almost nothing in the presence of others, wrapping spectator round in painted scenes of history, mood-blowing, object-seeking, a constellated form in which art and the fantasized future university coincide, form requiring the presence of others, sounding in the head of the writer, writing almost nothing in the presence of others, complete thoughts, tongues break down into choirs, wishes break down to facts, Barrett Watton. Commingling of the living and the dead breaks apart the direction of a sentence. What happened? A stray piece of conversation or an incidental fantasy about a mythic creature occurring on a derive in 1979 or 1988 fashions a connection to a poet's discourse on the symbolic in public institutions in 1981 and 1991. The sun in an Egyptian myth passes through phases of America's racist strength and weakness. The underworld of the Greeks flows through prior history. We wear each other's thoughts, but not in the same era. A choir of tongues figures a relational world, one that takes pleasure in the noisy hauntings of unpredictable, sometimes nonsensical or truthfully rough arrangements. The Minotaur may have surfaced onto the streets in the clump of memory's glamorous boots, but the creature equally, dissonantly, remains an undressed animal stationed in the labyrinth of literature, waiting with hopeful resignation for its redeemer. Coinciding or clashing accounts join the transformation of the Minotaur to the infinity of its waiting. Without memory's knowledge of her friend's departure, she is left waiting at a labyrinth intersection between then and now. Carla is visiting and elsewhere, a location where language arts under condition of revolution engage a two-way street lined with institutional buildings. This is the site where Lorenzo Thomas, or History, a poet who didn't go out looking to write poems since they simply appeared when it was necessary to write them, has entered the University of Houston downtown. He will be employed there for the rest of his life, with classrooms stationed across the street from a prison. On his side of the street, history bears witness to the walls blocking the view of racist logics on the other. History gives Carla a tour of the site, recalling to mind something he had once said in an artist residency in San Francisco. If we are writers, we need not fear symbols. We need to control them by making them serve us. On a tour of window-enshrined university hallways looking out onto the prison, he brings Carla up to date on Afrocentric perspectives of the past. Scholarly discourse inscribes the university, the prison, and the skyscrapers of downtown Houston in a mindful, startling arrangement. Notes fly, exchange in mid-sentence, ornate old-fashioned lines flex through distortions. Lorenzo Thomas. Facing a horizonless blue mosaic in a sunlit passageway, Carla describes the symbolic drive toward autonomy and separation from the mother as a truncated version of development, this having been precipitated by history's question, how are your brother and Steve? Her brother is bereft from the loss of love to AIDS and now lives in the hate. Steve is studying psychotherapy and has introduced her to the writing of Jessica Benjamin, a psychoanalyst who made a feminist contribution to the Oedipal narrative of child development. Equally crucial to development, to become adult, is a relation to the mother that requires not separation, but the child and adult existing together in the same space of recognition. Benjamin's theory offered Carla, a mother, an explanation for her critique of phallocentric logic and conventional forms of narrative. History listens to her feminist interpretation of child development with one raised eyebrow. I don't think I want to go there. Apparently, there is something about the maternal history wishes to shake off. He proceeds to discuss the development of mathematics in Africa along with symbols of the sun that extend beyond European usage. They have turned their backs now to the blue mosaic tiles and again look out the university windows to the other side of the blinding street. In this glass, when every face is seen, these mirrors will hold conversations with the sun. Lorenzo Thomas. Acquires an aesthetic autonomy easily criticized as borrowed from art. New York City, on a sultry evening some years after the death of memory, Carla and A are walking through the Bowery to an art party. A, or Amy, is an editor and Carla is a writer and teacher living in Detroit. It is 2000, so it's easy to get to New York from Detroit on little money and quick notice, no more. The missing memory is a bond between them, or shared unreality. It seemed just yesterday that memory had arranged a gathering next to a freeway overpass at a long table at a diner on Dubose Street in San Francisco. Always in the shadow of the overpass, the meeting place was conducive to a ghostly assemblage of quills with literary bragging rights. They exercised the rights, for the most part, with a certain reserve poised on a sly edge between desire and competition. This was the early 90s, a land of grief and disparity. The gathering underscores the quills' openly acknowledged good fortune. We are alive is a vow they made on this day that could have been the death or canceled contract of memory, who had recently documented in a fiction the then current president's notions of art. Quote, "We will have truth that is the inability of memory." Kathy Acker, My Mother, Demonology. Even without considering the political agenda initiated against memory, it goes without saying that the queer bashing, oh, I missed the paragraph, so I'm sorry. I have to read this one or it won't make any sense. Not far from the small apartment where Ted Berrigan wrote the sonnets in the 60s, the Bowery Art Party takes place in a palatial live-in studio with an interior courtyard converted from a small cigar factory. The place has a strange aura, as if in inaccessible areas of the little estate, defunct products were secretly still being made. A wax sculpture of a full-sized Arabian horse adorned with wax riding regalia greets them in an entranceway. In the room next to this is where Carla is to have a surprising encounter with Philip, or Talent. Even without considering the political agenda initiated against memory, it goes without saying that queer bashing did not arrive first in the 90s. Talent had almost been taken from us in the early 80s before Carla had gotten to know him, knifed on his bicycle by a homophobic attacker in Berkeley as he rode home filled with hope and happiness. But then, Carla is seated alone on a red leather Moroccan stool in a room of many leather stools, Persian carpets, and film images of guests at a party in another lifetime. The Super 8 projection show them gathered around a table. They are ghostly lights with dancing lips, emanations of an interior view of a social event that normally isn't photographed. A lovely someone cuts a cake. The table trembles, everything is washed with blue. Connecticut bursts with civility. Andy Warhol flits across the screen of a lunch movie filmed by James Elliott, the innovative curator of the Wadsworth Atheneum and lead director of the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, whom Carla worked for in the early 80s. Now, his entire collection of Super 8 films produced between 1972 and 1983 are in the possession of one of our hosts, a houseboat neighbor of Jim's from Sausalito. The Bowery Cigar Factory is actually a powerful suction cup controlled by a John Ashbery storyboard in ancient Greece. The film reflects the strangeness of this secret operation. Talent discovers Carla in a devastated frame of mind, experiencing simultaneous class anxiety and mourning. She doesn't want to leave the room. Talent, a loyal friend, watches one lunch movie after another with her. Carla grieves for Jim and, childlike, wishes to run away with his films. She senses Frank O'Hara ghostly nearby. Talent describes his Laban studies. In the next room, belly dancers entertain the guests. Carmen watches from a shadow in the courtyard smoking a cigar. She is introduced as Karen Finley. A and Carla leave with absent memory. They leave Talent with the spirits of Jim Elliott's Connecticut belly dancers and his man. When Carla and A reach the corner where they are about to run into Kate Millett and Cynthia McDonald, Carla glares at A just for a moment and hisses in a near whisper as she turns her head in the direction of the factory, "We forgot the punching bag." A looks back, nonplussed. as there had been no punching bag, only laced punch. Reflects a childlike freedom. On skates, the essay was a snapshot known as Bowery Barbie, a tall woman with lime green above the shoulder hair and straight bangs precisely clothing her forehead. Her smock and tights were striped, orange, colorful, a hero of the neighborhood. She was just returning from a political action to save the entire block, including Kate's apartment, just a few doors down. Catches fire without scruple. Nearby, 1978, accompanied by memory, hailed her audience. Carla felt the ghost of that moment as she kissed A goodbye, traveling with the absence of memory to her desk to record what has already been recorded. A reading by memory and history at the Ear Inn on November 11th, 1978, 20 years, 11 months, and 16 days before the death, and 27 years, 4 months, and 7 days before histories. Carla listened to their young voices, which caught fire on what others had already done. History read first from 2 translations of a Vietnamese poet, circa 1870, 1907, as well as many excellent poems of his own, including The Fine Clothes of Year Before Last. Memory, who did not write original text, pilfered Propertius for her finale, a ghoulish, dirge-like elegy marked with Cynthia's fury. Carla now composed an abbreviated duet, bringing the 2 friends together in 2010 for a moment through their art. Only fit now there are such things as ghosts. Death does not all things end for the garden, the car wash, the ritual of stinking for 4 days and pale yellow from vanquished even shades escape their graves to solve a problem that strikes to you, that stinks to you to high heaven, and just in general stinks. You see, Jane was seen to lean over bed, sweating and sleeping, though near the roar or just buried Broadway in these shabby clothes. Okay, that's enough. Thanks.
We're going to try to keep to 15 minutes each to end us before too late. Now, Gabrielle Daniels.
How many of you have either read or seen a movie called Rebecca? Okay. Well, after I saw the Hitchcock version for the umpteenth time, I thought to myself, you know, a black woman wouldn't stand for that kind of stuff. And then I just went, okay, let's see how I would do that. So I've been working on this piece, and I've got almost 100 pages. And instead of Rebecca, it's called Becky, which is kind of pejorative for you girls out there. But on the other hand, it's an interesting, well, whatever. Anyway, there's been some changes to it, of course. I know once I finally get it published and whatnot, the Du Maurier people and I are going to have a few talks. But I've changed the locations. It's not set in Monte Carlo anymore. It's set in Sardinia. She is not necessarily a companion, she's more of a teacher for these Chinese students that are out on this yacht. And they're all rich. And she's a tutor. And she meets Mr. Winter in Sardinia. And the love story starts from there. And another thing, two other things. One is that Mrs. Van Halpern is now 3 Chinese women. And let's see. Oh yeah, and they're called the Junta. And well, I'll explain. Anyway. So the setting is that they were first in Cagliari, and now they've moved to, the action has moved to Porto Cervo. I've never been to these places, okay? I've only been there through the internet. I'm tired of Cagliari just in time. A few of the young men wanted to pursue women they had previously met, and the young women wanted to shop more. And so the yacht sailed for Porto Cervo and Costa Smeralda. So there were really bright lights at $300,000 euros per square meter. In a short time, I knew where I was and what I was about. And it was during one weekend tour to Bonifacio that Max came upon me. At first, he stared at me as if he had seen me before. I knew I'd never seen or heard of him at all. So when I felt his eyes on me and I looked up, I didn't know what to think. Perhaps I had gotten his attention while I was speaking English in passing to a caramel-skinned, white-uniformed waiter from Egypt who seemed to know more about Costa and the islands than I did. Max looked like any other white European or American wearing the pastels and beiges of summer, no matter what label, but it takes only one idiot mistaking my aloneness for being a hooker. The only thing that distinguished him from everyone else was the flash of what appeared to be a very expensive watch, but even that could be invitation. I waited for him to approach, readying a comeback. The first thing he asked upon getting my attention was, "American?" "Yes," I said, my brown eyes meeting his blues levelly. "God," he replied, "you're everywhere, it seems." "What?" I meant that Black Americans are everywhere in Europe. "Only where you're going." "Right," he mumbled, "you're right. You must be looking for us," I said rather archly, "to remind you of home. There's nobody like you there." I inclined my head. Again, I'm not sure how to take that statement. "I couldn't place you," he stammered. "For an American, you certainly have a British accent." "I lived in Britain for 2 years." "Oh," he said, "so I was right. Sometimes you pick up some bad habits in places." He winced. "I'm sorry, I just live in a certain zip code. There's hardly anyone black living nearby, unless they're live-in." "So you notice that now. That's all for you, you know." I thought that all this would squash him, but he stayed. I was surprised, not knowing how to proceed next. He looked down, pursing his lips, and then he looked at me again. "I'm Max Winter," he said, offering his hand. I blinked, but I shook it. "Should I know your name?" "I own an estate called Mandalay. Town and Country, Architectural Digest, you know." "No, I don't know. I know a lot of things, Mr. Winter, but I didn't know about your estate. I know about the poem, though. Don't call me Mr. Winter. I'm Max. Tell me your name, please. So I told him, and that was the beginning of everything, starting with my name. What a lovely, unusual name, he said. Really? I half expected a joke about it being one of those made-up black names. It was an old European name for girls and women. After my mother, her younger sister, had passed giving birth to me, my aunt had done the naming as well as the raising. I had expected to cringe, but Max didn't give up. Max had been to Bonifacio before and showed me most of the spots in the Haute Ville. We seemed to linger at an area of the Citadel wall that ran to calf height, with only a couple of thick iron bars across the missing length for safety, but I didn't care. I thought that was where they used to situate the cannons, or where they did not restore the stones or bricks. He didn't make like he was about to jump off, but his mood had altered. Darkened, it appeared, and he did not explain. I thought that must have been a bad memory. After a while, I just looked out at the view of the town, the water, and the boats like he did. I guess he just wanted to have his moment and to think, so I let him. I had my own thoughts, and if he had cared to ask, I would have said something, because the water sparkled as if it were full of gems. By the time we had lunch, Max had recovered from whatever he was feeling. He said he had been a widower for more than a year and a half, so that explained the missing wedding ring, and possibly even the dark thoughts. I don't think that I heard what his wife had died of, because an inner voice kept warning me to listen, and I strained to ignore it and to hear him clearly. He had just turned 50, he admitted, but he didn't look it. His graying brown hair was streaked blonde from his being out of doors in the bright sun. I guessed rightly that he had been sailing and not golfing. He said that he had finally gotten out of the house. Way out of the house, I thought. His skin was tanning, not turning barbecue red. He looked, as they say, all of a piece. I had listened to more to him than given my story. I thought that's what he wanted. I had 2 degrees. I was based in Paris. And suddenly I blurted out about Aunt Dee's death. And the tears, unbidden, began to flow. And the hollowness that had hovered around me cracked and broke. I think now that it was because he was a stranger who could keep my secret. It was inconsequential to someone like him. I felt that he would not hurt me like the junta. He would leave and forget it within an hour, I thought. But he listened to me, and his gaze held and did not waver, although he did not speak for some moments after I stopped dabbing my eyes. We have something in common after all. We're all alone in the world, he said at last, and he smiled for the first time. He and I, me and him. Thereafter, we were a couple. My free time was spent with him in Porto Cervo, and we went to lunch or dinner and for the sights. Weekends were for day trips. I was glad that we skirted the celebrities' hangouts as much as we could. We both were not wanting to show off. I always met him well away from the boat. I didn't want to invite comment from my pupils, or worse, the junta. For the first time, I felt it was reciprocal. I was interested in him because he was interested in me. He asked me what I thought about visiting Van Gogh's Arles, St. Paul de Vence, and the ruin of Baldwin's house in Mont Saint-Michel, that miracle at low tide. In return, he told me about his favorite places in the Mediterranean, the wines, the food, the walks, and the way the sun shone between 9 and midday. What we liked and what we didn't like, without the judgment and with the acceptance. There was one afternoon when we jousted about the merits of a book that we had both read, which led to more about me and more about him. I listened, taking him in, going on that journey with and to him. Sometimes I would almost forget that I had to teach a class and I would go galloping down to the gangway. After a week or two, we graduated from kissing each other chastely on the cheek to my receiving his kiss, my face upturned, meeting him halfway. It was after we had dined at Aqua, which is a real place, at Aqua, and watched the sun go down and its fiery aftermath playing in the sky as the circus went on around us. In the dusk, as the street lamps slowly flickered on, he impatiently guided my chin towards his lips. I was startled. I lifted a hand as if to brush him away. My fingers nearly met his face, but they could not obscure his eyes, piercing and direct. By degrees, I dropped my hand and just let it happen. My lids closed just as our lips pressed together. That's all it was, warm pressure, but there was no question what he really meant. He did not linger more than a few seconds, but as he drew away, I found that he was studying me, his lips slightly parted. He wanted to know, how was it for me? I could not help but give a little smile. It was nice, I marveled. I trembled not from desire or from the breeze from the water, but from nervousness. He smiled back. With that, I left it to him. Wherever he would go, I would follow, but he was clearly, gently, going to take it as slow as he could, and I was grateful for that. There were some days, I thought, that I could hear my heart pound in my ears, as when we succumbed to our first open-mouthed kiss during a trip to feel the pink sand at Caprera between our toes. Originally, we thought of Spiaggia Rosa. However, access was limited. The sand was now completely white, and all that was left were movie memories. So we decided to go to Caprera. On our walk, I took a few spoonfuls of sand in a small sandwich baggie that I'd earlier begged off of one of the sous chefs on the yacht, and it joined all the other remembrances in my purse that Max also knew about. After we visited Garibaldi's house, Max and I had lunch. We said little, as I mostly daydreamed under Max's amused gaze. I don't know how I looked, but to Max I must have been that wide open. It was such a lovely day with only a few clouds, and the breeze was like silk. I looked out to the sea and the people and the boats in my immediate surroundings, and I really, really loved that moment. I had entered the Buddhahood of bliss. I said that I liked La Maddalena better than Cortesuero because there were a mix of people among the residents and tourists. I could fit in right here, I said. Sure, with the right trust fund, Max corrected me, and we both laughed. We had an hour to go before we took the boat back to Cerville, so we just browsed about the old town, to the shops, even the movie theater, and the little opera house. It was Max's first time there as well. Max seemed content to just let me prattle on like a child. I noted that he was listening with a slight, amused smile on his lips. The Magdalene herself could not have been that sinful. I was happy. And it didn't take an aperitif. I just didn't care. I was not paying a lot of attention to where we were going. I said that the sand was not enough to recall everything that looked and felt and smelled and tasted good, but I didn't know what was. I said that I still appreciated the pink sand at Kilmarnock, but Caprera now surpassed it. Max took his chance. He took me in his arms in a picturesque but little traversed alley full of sun and dotted with geraniums, whether in pots or half-ruined boxes or planters in a wall, so that the alley had its own built-in fragrance. Excuse me. He was devouring me, but perhaps that was part of the pleasure. I could hardly begin to respond to him, though. Okay, I'm sorry. He was devouring me, but perhaps that was part of the pleasure. I could hardly begin to respond to him. Seconds felt like years, and I managed to pull away, overwhelmed and needing air. But he grabbed my hand, drew me close, and kissed me again as if his whole being was pouring into me. I think that I could have fainted, but only his voice kept me conscious. You, I've made you happy, he mused aloud, his fingers cupping my face. I've made you so very happy. Once I heard him murmur, bright, bright eyes, his nose buried in my neck and taking in my scent before he let me go. Bright eyes, the pupils no doubt wide and aroused, but I was not ready to make love to Max. I was enjoying myself, enjoying the kissing, enjoying him, living and breathing again. At least that's what I wanted to believe. I didn't want to think that I was also in love beyond it being just summer. Sometimes his lips were moist and then they seemed dry, as if he were teasing me about the consistency of his feelings. But really he had only forgotten to use lip balm or to wet them. Other times we returned to the rock of square one. We simply hugged each other, and that was good too. He didn't feel hesitant and careful, but loose and relaxed with me. And he wasn't aroused. He felt good. Then we would say our goodbyes and part for the day. Is that 15 minutes? Okay.
Gail Scott.
Hi everyone, thanks for staying.
Thank you.
What a weekend. Thank you, Eric and Daniel and Chris Chen. And I better not take too long thanking everyone because everybody's leaving. But anyway.
I'm staying.
You're not all leaving.
We're totally staying.
Hi. Okay. I am rather trepidatingly going to read from, bye Kevin. From a new manuscript tonight. Some of you know my book, My Paris, which was about a long visit I spent in Paris in the 90s. And my Parisian friends didn't really like the book all that much when it first came out. I think they found it a bit shocking that I would dare to pronounce myself on Paris. So I decided to have another go with New York. And
Will be nice.
well, I mean, actually, I really appreciate if you said exactly what you think before it gets published, in case I'm really blowing it. I have a couple of notes. I need to set it up. I timed the reading. It won't be more than maybe 17 minutes, but that at the most. One thing I feel, I write a lot about cities, Montreal, Paris, and now New York, and one of the things that I feel about foreign cities, because New York is in a way, a foreign city for me, is that whatever you say about another country is actually just what you're saying about your own. So furniture music will be in the title, which was what Satie called background music, and I think that's So that's one thing. The original idea was to do a kind of left criticism of liberalism from 2008 to 2012, but using the language of poetry versus the language of the media. And I have to change that angle a little bit given the current situation, but it's kind of interesting to note that when Barack Obama was in power in the US, we had the most right-wing prime minister in Canada that we've, I think, ever in my memory had anyway. And now we have pretty Justin Trudeau, and you've got slightly less pretty. So that's, let's see, what else can I tell you? I'm always interested in playing around with questions of narrative, etc. And in this piece, I'm not playing much with syntax as I have been in my recent books, but I'm trying to find ways of narrating almost between the lines of poems. And my dream for a narrative for this book, which I haven't totally pulled off, but I'm getting closer, is to shape it like a palindrome, because I really hate the idea of, forward moving history. Most of it is anecdotes about walking around New York with my friends. Rachel Levitsky, Eileen Miles, Stacy Shemazik, Brenda Coltis are very present in the first part, and also writers from Detroit and California, San Francisco especially, who come through. But this is a fairly brief passage. If I just told you, it's important to set it up because it's not, perfect yet. I think so. I think that's it. Oh yes, one more thing that's really important. So the text, it's written in two columns. Basically the text is in, fills up most of the page, and then but I don't mostly use the names. So the whole thing is tied together with poetry citations, but I don't use the names of the poets in the text. They are on the line beside the text, so that the right hand of the page serves as a kind of index, which is kind of fun because it also gives you an idea of who the cool poets were, my friends, in that period. So, I'll start. Books too begin, like the week, with a day of rest. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to say who I'm citing, who I'm quoting rather. So, I'm quoting Walter Benjamin for the title. Victor Shklowski. You can guess who, you can try and imagine who I'm quoting as I go through. Walter Benjamin, Victor Shklowski, Marjorie Wellish, Camille Waugh, Fred Waugh, Juliana Spar, David Brooke, Rod Smith, Eileen Miles, Tim Douglas, Nurbezi, Arabito Yepes, Leslie Scalapino, and Mina Loy, and finally a brief homage to the great poet Akila Oliver at the end. It's common to think life supplies biography. The Bolsheviks, in extremis, sought to control biography by organizing every aspect of life without grasping, according to the Russian critic, the anarchy of life. You, well bathed in your late century potpourri of Marxism, psychoanalysis, avant-garde art, were happy to go with that. Easily holding language as primary in shaping perception, hence occurrence, you were yet chary of sentencing's tilt toward the predetermined or habitual. In this our era of tediously iterative, automatic response media, poetic language's slants, estrangements, glyphs, apostrophes seem better suited to grasp our quasi-anarchic moment. So your early Obama-era ramble to be enlisting poets in semiotic and bodily circulation between two sites, Montreal, Manhattan, 2 or more elections, between a crash and apparent recovery. We have seen it all before, money markets falling after rapacious accumulation to ever-insurgent sounds of war, while single family holding 40% of entire democratic nation's wealth. Mercifully, a poet is any one. Harlem, 2008, soft snow falling, Obama just elected, man on sidewalk taunting, white woman passing. No more white in the White House, black president in the residence. Was this time apostrophized a minute? This hope calling, crowding around the tall, narrow suit, running toward the residence. Behind, running woman in blue electric pantsuit thought ugly by the media. We were well conversed in the irony of that. Not to mention a stock market hitting bottom behind Greek revival columns, irony of Hellenic theater chorus of millions of housing bubble, mortgage foreclosures soon to be advised, democracy oblige. If your home was foreclosed between 2008 and 2011, claim forms will be mailed to you. If you think you may be hard to locate, maybe living in your car, you can file a claim with your state attorney general along streets around your temporary 2008 Quebec Arts Council Soho studio. You, observing smug, do not we have a social net? The scrubbed, pressed, anxious, newly unemployed people, bewilderingly patient despite maybe even being hungry, lining double around entire block for one single job. Pathetically, you want to throw a brick through a window. Any account of another country is an account of one left behind. Seti called background music, furniture music, riffs and repeats in back of head are playing north simultaneously, electro response to the 2008 edition of the Great Depression, the re-elected pale-eyed robot haircut, cozy of the bitumen family compact, Mr. Harper, promoting transparent governance, then closing parliament to stay in power. Walking over tundra-like landscape, wife Lorene in white bell-bottom pantsuit holding his hand. They seem a parody. You walk up Broadway, Houston Lafayette, the Bowery under O's campaign, portrait posters, hope writ large across bottoms, somewhere between Che-style socialist realist and American superhero comic in design, Obama, daily on news wooing war and economy-weary campaign-stop audiences, sometimes sounding to you faintly griot in cadence, young woman viral on YouTube, stilettos, ultra-tight shorts, pole dancing on bus, lip-syncing, I got a crush on Obama. A palindrome almost, the initial 2008 euphoria surrounding the president who, if in time's next pirouette to be running again, blown like Clee's angel into future with head bent back against deluge of accumulating hostility, while in north the weak, wobbly, pseudo-progressive center facing disintegration. The continent's people's electoral campaign after electoral campaign running toward promised unfulfillable to the point of running backwards hope. For we commonly conceive our words as capturing what we will have been in time, yet the future anterior, so hopefully eluded, remains irreducible to this economy. New York poet admonishing, never did I receive your public lettering. Packing, 05.11 eve of Canadian federal elections for Manhattan, when Obama announcing finally getting Osama. Narrative and leading off 11 o'clock TV news in Canada, elbowing to second place our imminent electoral joust, speculatively to be ushering in historic social democratic regime, because folks busy getting in chips and beer for next day's historic moment, like watching the hockey playoffs, n'est-ce pas? Being treated mostly on that Canadian election eve to crowd of gleeful USians rushing into Times Square for carnivalesque revenge celebration. Only the worst tourists go to Times Square, snapping E, whose two-toned pickup parked near Chelsea Cafe, where sitting was C in from San Francisco to launch superb Pro-Am collection Sherwood Forest. I want to write Eileen, writing C, but I'm feeling guilty, I'm too high. I fold my muscles into wads and sleep soundlessly. Then you loving her post-citizen profile. My role as, her poet-citizen profile. My role as host is to change expression slowly. I suggest frameworks for industry, masquerading as desire. I know I'm wrong. Wrong as that burn in my crotch, where delicious wish stirs the red broth, dimpled white line, head straight for Canada. The world needs me. Which profile you can't help sitting next to Canadian poet-citizens' notion of a citizen. Why apply for the job if the hinge isn't broken? I have stolen the report and now can't find a door just when I need one, even a sliding door. That's just such good criticism of portrait of our passive-aggressive. It's just strong points. Why apply for the job if the hinge isn't broken? I have stolen the report and now I can't find a door just when I need one, even a sliding door. I think it's really funny. Waken on 9th Avenue A. No internet equals radio quiet re-election result chez nous. But sun shining glorious into Jay's East Village upper floor room. The J Museum, you calling it. J being performance artist, jester, genius, apartment, stage set of objects, sculptures, props so beautiful and strange, delicate red-orange tresses of 3-foot paper mobile, curling gently in breeze over bed, removing cover, serving as kitchen counter, entering vintage tub, tendered green maple leaves beckoning outside window, making set more romantic by minute. Paris in spring can't be East Village in spring. Light breeze from open window, sun shining beyond grill of the balcony, conjuring the beats, jazz, Kerouac, or it's the 60s, Delaney and Hacker on way to breakfast further downtown. Buildings quite gentrified, red brick, cornices, people strolling village like compared to anxious entrepreneurial pulse in Soho crash autumn 2008. To Bob Holman's Poetry Club squat mid-rising towers of Bowery, bench outside to smoke on half wall in front of doors in a tavern, that girl snoozing at table, curtained backroom bar, rows of folding chairs filled with backsides of poets, reader from California, tall boots, blonde, talk, a little nervous, on collaboration, then delivering in loud, data-like diction, manifesto kind of howl, updated, co-written with left San Francisco poet, poem of citizens, angry, tired dwellers of parking lots and dirty, cluttered landscapes, perfect epigraph from Washington poet, we work too hard. We're too tired to fall in love. Therefore, we must overthrow the government. We're too tired to overthrow the government. The poets keep saying, occupying government. And you remembering JS having taught in Hawaii, where issues not unlike in Francophone Quebec. Then Bowery poets sharing garlicky greens, chicken, tender pork, dumplings, steamed fish, Chinese restaurant, green bowl over door. One living in Albany, so listening to Canadian state radio. What is happening to you Canadians? You not retorting. Look after your own onions. Having at Cafe Pick Me Up earlier, read in Le Devoir digital edition on 9th Street, still expecting to hear French. Quebec to reverse giant north rivers for hydroelectrical purposes. Isn't that indigenous territory? Usual anger and pit of stomach, plopping into heap of ashes. Oh, some accommodation to be made in interest of cheap electricity that all we citizens to be sharing, implying you thinking we all part of occupying governance. What to say when the North, former liberal panacea for US radicals, now under Mr. Shh, worse than here. How can you just turn a river? Albany guy asking twice. Visitor being one exoticizing what abominating at home. Bedroom wall too close to edifice behind. Mornings through poor fitting windows. Guy 10 feet away coughing up stuff. Showering, child somewhere speaking Slavic language, fresh voice, mother breaking into song, spontaneity, seeming to come from elsewhere, now rain. What better music than lullaby of early morning rain swishing through leaves, somewhere clock going off, one, having left for work, maybe that, black-clad silhouette down below on sidewalk, tight pants, long curved up boot toes, rushing to subway, clock pinging for hour. Most of day, strangely quiet. But tonight, portmanteau celebration by local poets of one passing from AIDS during height of epidemic. Running to parish hall, packed with men, trimmed, gymmed, groomed, mostly gray, for tribute to Tim Jugos, latter-day New York school poet. Some women, E in plaid shirt, beautiful young girlfriend, tiny pooch draped lengthwise on arm, the men gathering around her, eyeing E and girlfriend, a little envious, you thinking. Pooch's brown mug, when she up front reading Duglow's selection, hanging on every word with intensity of the besotted. I'm in bed in the Plaza Hotel, New York. The guy who picked me up is in the bathroom, and I'm wondering what he'll want me to do, worrying that there's some secret way of lovemaking between men that I've never heard of. Words, frank, unabashed, and little dog knowing nobody reading this kind of work better than E. Awake with bleeding eye. Bleeding tears are asking, she's impossible. By morning, eyeball rouge et noir, off to specialist office, surely very Swiss-like specialists in North. 2nd Avenue bus, put card in machine and stop for receipt. If receiptless in uniform gets on, $150, uniform gets on. There is a choreography of control. We all acquiesce before systems of control. Proffered evidence of obedience, your deferential smile. Such a good girl. Ditto several others. That automatically submissive gesture of hand quickly handing over. Woman, Eastern European accent, having none of it. The whole system too confusing, she yells, and not enough stops. And. Guard deboards. Sober faces turned downward, now animated, smiley, conspiratorial, chatting from seat behind. Loud laugh, an African-American man, no longer seemingly absorbed in book, laughing at all of us, shaking with laughter still when you, disembarking halfway to South Ferry. Admittedly, a little disappointed in mourning doves outside Jay's museum's window, their cooing and complicity on iron balcony, first you branding as exemplary, loving couple, but soon, if male, prettier with rosy flush of flesh on breast, leaning over flower pot of seeds to feed, the smaller, scrappier female pecking his back, pecking, till he moving, or she's simply sitting on the seeds so he cannot, and she cannot either, eat, her whole little body filling entire conference of the pot. Is this just nature, or vibes of cutthroat post-crash economics, like sparrows, who it is said, singing badly in city, because miming ambient sound. Easter, ours in Brooklyn, eating delicious pasta, tomato garlic sauce, suppressing Easter lamb back home. Loving table view of street as in a Jarmusch film, single vertical red fluorescent liquor sign on corner, in the dark figures coming, going daily, are saying whiter, breakthrough window of hipster cafe she refusing to go into, also wars on the radio, and from Mexico on library shelf behind, voices of wars, threesomes, drafts, and mothers, fractal to point of natural. I write fiction while I hear music. In the past, characters, at least in one form of discourse, were plasmatic, even invisible, ghostly, not solid. In fact, characters had no other architecture than that of mystical music, next to zither poetics, deliberate string procedure to force continual change of one's conceptions while reading, moving toward a new time wherein there is no inner. And right behind dining table chair, early 20th, feminist illusionist manifesto, author still 02.17, galvanizing in her extravagance. The feminist movement, as at present is instituted, is inadequate. Women, if you want to realize yourselves, you are in the eve of a devastating psychological upheaval. All your pet illusions must be unmasked. The lies of centuries have got to go. Are you prepared for the wrench? There is no half measure, no scratching on the surface of the rubbish heap of tradition will bring about reform. The only method is absolute demolition. Cease to place your confidence in economic legislation, vice crusades, and uniform education. You are glossing over reality. Professional and commercial careers are opening up for you. Is that all you want? Here at 0302 Women's Salon, meeting Aquila Oliver, speaking low to adolescent son, his dark hair slicked back, straining to go out. Old, familiar, single parent anxiety, you knowing, you not knowing, when child brown and police force mostly white with dangerous tendency to racial profiling. The genocide, Aquila writing, that wears my face. Later, at 010.08 party, your eyes meeting hers, almond, tired, under rim of fedora, Olucci gone, deceased, poorly attended in LA hospital. Later still, 04.09, racing from that French woman's East Village house, her being French, A+1 in domestic and female arts, flat impeccable, kind of 80s plastic utensils, handles and turquoise table, white sofa, crackling sheets, plants, cat, cigarettes, family racket, ex-KGB lover, to hear Aquila read on Bowery, a toast in the House of Friends, for Olucci MacDonald, 1982 to 2003, poems grieving the silence of grief on public square. But what's so daring, so radical, is having experienced the most absolute demolition. Aquila Oliver mastering that slippery ventriloquist love is fearlessly parsing ecstatic, i.e. sacred, side of grief. I was carrying the baby in my arms. And as I said, the energy shifted. Desire is not clean, desire is not clean. My sweet loved one, what's your name now? All around me, moving time. My sweet loved one, what's your name now?
Nayland Blake.
Hi everybody, and thanks Eric and Gail for bringing me here. I'm floored to be in this august company. Usually in these sorts of situations, I'm actually going to do something that is similar to what I would usually do on these occasions, which is to read something that I guess is kind of a performance script. I don't know, but in any event, it's kind of bespoke for the occasion. Recently finished, and I thought I would start out with one of my favorite jokes, which is two knights are riding through a gorgeous fantasy landscape of crags and forests, and one knight turns to the other and points over to a bush and says, "Is that a hobbit?" And the other knight says, "No, it's a hobo and a rabbit." But they're making a hobbit. This is called Samwise Gamgee Cries with padding. 1. I am service-oriented. 2. An Enlist is the desperation of those of me who can't master form, but want to be held by somebody else or hang out about to compare distances. 3. And Sam is, I am, longing for the Shire where I could decode every potato, down to the dirt that whelped it and the chip it aspired to. 4. And I wanted to be a loved object, understood always to be talking back before rings and stupid elves and stupid thieving elfin. 5. And I couldn't sit as the bewitching character whose blankness gave birth to the absorbed reflector's agonized, flowering insides. 6. I have a sturdy hobbit torso. 7. And so impractical, not theoretical, which is the name I gave to people that stick "the" in front of every noun to wish for meaning. The body, the lovers, the discourse. 8. And so Sam, adjacent to meaning. 9. I don't care how much there is, as long as it's firm. 10. And if I had made a lettered list, you would now have some sense of how long I was going to go on for. 11. And in this version, Samwise is child of identical cousins and the Riddler and Gomez Adams. 12. And so dungeons, cigars, train wrecks, lithium, henchmen, hot dogs, crepe Suzette. 13. And so, well, we aren't available until history, until I am become inert, and as Missy says, lose control. 14. And so I can't help it. I regard with suspicion every person who hides their fine feet within shoes. 15. And on another hand, I should start a to undo list. 16. And Sam was and I am jealous of Smeagol's bifurcation, the way that their treachery and inner turmoil seems to captivate F to the exclusion of all others. So undo. That's right, it's better than yours. I could teach you. 17. And so petulantly I say, hey, I carried the ring too, me too, at least until F pulled it back. 18. Is there colorism in the orc community? 19. And so the dwarves braiding each other's beards, hands sliding through hardened hands. 20. And Mom was in an Amityville Horror, the one with the lamp, so I am an heir to stories too. 21. And if Middle-earth runs different races, does that dissolve prejudice or stand for it? A world built separate must be scrubbed. 22. Service-oriented. So in the year since F's departure, I've lapped piss off the floors of a subterranean club, now closed, known as the Manhole. But that was for cameras, so maybe it doesn't count, or maybe it counts more, co-star. 23. And I've been the mayor of Hobbiton 8 times. 24. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten how paragraphs work out of peevishness, but the men who left the piss smoked cigars and the floor was gritty on the tongue. 25. I, Sam, I was, am, F's Batman, serving, but called a switch. 26. And so service-oriented, so when M, El Rey Nomo, suggests I put on a chicken suit, or that I have glory hole duty, or that those clamps belong on my balls, it all happens. And when L, the princess, says be daddy, or when J, the boss lady, says be dolly and presses my clit, I think, let's see where this is going, because that's where stories are minted and I could hitch a. 27. And if this was a lettered list, I could have stopped with the last one, but I'd have to charge. 28. And so initials solve nothing, except and including who, oh who, will ever write the history of flirtation and socialism and sarcasm. 29. And every aside is a middle on this earth. 30. And then F goes west, stretched thin and under-buttered, and that I, and that is Sam, turn to Bywater and go on, and there is yellow light, and there is fire within. 31. And well, I'm back.
And if you're a featured participant and you haven't yet signed the poster, please go to the back corner and I can help you with that. Next up is Renee Gladman.
I am so tired. Oh my God. I am for real. I can't even think of anything funny to say about how tired I am. Okay. Hi everybody. It's so nice to be with you, and I've had a couple conversations with people about what it's like to be here, and in a sort of like historicizing or becoming historical perspective, and one thing I've just sort of been appreciating is, at least from the outside, the sort of containability of this sort of first generation of new narrative writers, and think about the people who I was in community with in the late 90s, and sort of, not sort of, it doesn't have to be negative, but just feeling the way that I always felt we were a little bit more dispersed, and a lot of us who were writing prose around that time. Some of us don't write it anymore, or off doing other things. And so I had an opportunity to write about community and maybe a year or two ago, and was thinking through these things. This is a piece that's called number 5 of the 11 calamities, but it didn't actually make it into calamities, so it has its own calamity. It doesn't have a title anymore. And I'm just going to read that and be done. I was thinking about Gail Scott's idea of a community of sentences as being identical to the community that's reading them, such that those of us present would be a community of people inside a community of sentences where we'd mix up who said what and would write countless novels full of our favorite words, bridge, city, street, with smaller connecting words in between, making throughways and partitions. We were trying to build architecture out of a certain set of words, structures where each word was a composite of all our usages. Half of my bridge got attached to a third of someone else's street, and novels were being written everywhere. My half and her third and other people's halves and thirds made structures for living, sentences, many sentences connecting on a grid. And we were each a presence inside these structures, each presence further dividing as you read. A community of sentences brought cities into being, sutured by gaps and terminals. We rode trains through these cities, writing in detours. I followed yours, and you followed mine, again dividing the space of our speaking, building paragraphs on top of others. And though community helped us write our books, we found it hard to have dinner parties. It was inevitable that all the books would be brought out, laid upon a table, and talked about as a movement. But later, when you wanted to think about what had been discussed, you couldn't get hold of the movement. It was gone. Somebody gave a list of names, and sometimes we were on it, and sometimes we were not. And these names crossed 3 generations, and all the time that we were on this list, we were moving gradually from one to the next. You were aging and writing prose, and other people were aging, and still others being born into a process of questioning and living that eventually led to prose. The dinner parties were hard because we thought we had arrived somewhere. Everyone got all their language out and put it in a pile. We emptied ourselves and said street, and said city, and said body. We built a novel of the room and stepped in and lost our way the whole night and left thinking a movement had been formed. But days later, I would try to reach for some of what had been done, and I'd hit a wall, the wall of my writing room, or the wall of an essay where it was hard to get enough distance to see who everyone was, and to say in language, this is what we were doing. The walls were porous and didn't hold much for very long, so the movement dissolved into individual letters, still marked by all our distinct angles, but no longer in a quorum. Thank you.
Halpern.
Yeah, thanks Renee for that expression of extreme exhaustion and saturation. I just want to say, like, over the course of the past 2 days, I've just been feeling this sense that there's no expression of gratitude will be adequate to what we've experienced over these past few days. So, I don't know, over the past 4 months I've been writing these little things as an effort to stay sane in the midst of so much fascist sludge. So I call them trifles. Melissa tells me I shouldn't call them trifles, but that's what they kind of feel like. I'll just read a few of them. This is called The Fake Noose Considered as a Weapon of Social Terror. The way the new fascists fornicate, it's like pleasure's a period piece, boiling sea swans alive for pageantry. They call it a joyful reenactment before plunging deep inside their self-same cops, a well-watered cliche toileting a race. For the supper I eat, unlike your face, it's composed of very meaty words. My grave syllabics can't even versify phalangist cock. It blocks my love for karaoke, crinoline, and cream. I think of fucking Pinochet with a ribbon sash of hard-earned meat strung out on the ludicrous wind I keep blowing through this stupid piece of wood. When your nails become my need, I sing these words for care, but the words will never be care, cause pamplemousse fakes my mouth, and the future will never come unless you fuck the present first. On the rise and fall of the Bolivar Fuerte. If only I could dissociate the value form from the work my index finger performs when I write, which isn't even labor, but something I want to call love because it's useless, by which I mean it's good, the way my body won't forget the forces that feed it when feeding isn't even forced. And this is just a variant of Rimbaud's chill reminder when he cries, "Je n'aurai jamais ma main," as if he had already lost his hand to the grinder. And this one I wrote a couple days ago. It's called The Fall of Raqqa. This morning reeks of fire in the north, where forest and vineyard smolder with the signs of something dark. A crystal night, so many flakes of leaf and pine settling like the body's ashen source. This dusting awakens, rushes in your hair, a fallout of debris moving us past the limits of poetry while stuck here inside my poem, where I can flirt with you without risking my frailty, floating freely like a limb, void of my body's weight. I fall for the ruse of your circadian rhythm, as these words were blood, and this line of verse a vein leading from your mouth, through which we sing the difference between pain and suffering before lapsing into old stock metaphors of the inner life and padded portfolios stuffed with other signs, as if our catastrophe had a dulcimer for a heart. I say in my dream that patriarchy is a structure through which violence expresses itself as value. But this has no context or motivation. Alone, standing on an atoll, I'm speaking to no one, though I might as well be at a fascist barbecue, which can be like an atoll, in that both share something with my poem, considered as an isolated incident in a sea of wreckage and waste. A shroud of smoke hovers above what doesn't trigger memories of gore, absent the flesh bobbing along in this phonemic arabesque, straddling the chasm between a wart-like mole on the periphery of your bosom and the destruction of an improbable country whose casualties exceed the reach of my song. Whoa.
I keep on forgetting to do what Kevin always does at meetings, which is take a picture of the audience from the podium. And so I thought I would do it now while everyone's tired. Thank you for being here, all the way from the
Love you guys.
Okay, and now finally, Robert Tremblay-McGaw.
You guys are hardcore for still being here. I'm going to read something that's super new and kind of messy. It's part of a longer thing, and this part is just called Benjamin Moore's White. There's no excuse. You don't even have to get up. Neither say I to enter. Solstice, heater clicks on, blows, and then as abruptly moves to off. We have begun to see words, The elect reaches for them, but they elude. So bigly might, in other words, offer something, yet words are merely curtains or like Gestapo boots. Ivanka's ahistorical despite their history. That is our history. Walking across Mission up into Noe Valley and then Glen Park, Achilles wrung out. We'll feel this later, this failure to stretch. For now we turn over what we are doing. Snow. With reference to the color of a person's skin, face, etc., lightness or fairness of complexion, especially when regarded as beautiful or desirable. The class stands in front of the images of Adam and Eve. On the left is Donald Jackson and Chris Tomlin's illumination from the St. John's Bible. In the center, Adam and Eve are Northern Europeans in a garden from which they will soon be expelled. The third is a stencil print of Sado Watanabe's couple. When asked what they notice, the students offer up observations about the strangeness that Adam is always on the left. In Jackson's print, Eve's smile is malicious. In one, there is a garden, while the others depict them in isolation. One uses colors and a decorative border. In the back of the group, I wait for it. I am waiting. The librarian guiding the class into the archives is about to pass on. I am waiting for it, for the silence to be broken, not wanting to leave this moment filled with the sound of erasure. I say it is interesting that Jackson's print depicts the couple as African, since we know humans originated in Africa. This seems fitting. Research later will inform me that Jackson has fashioned Adam and Eve as Ethiopian from the Karo tribe. We pass on before we can talk about Watanabe's stylized stencil, influenced by Menge, Japanese folk art, made with kozo, soybean milk, on washi. Founded in 1883, Benjamin Moore and Company, also known as Benjamin Moore Paints or simply Benjamin Moore, is an American company that produces paint, including many, at least 50 shades of white. For example, you might buy Genesis, Patriotic, or Chalk White. Chalk. The idea is to open up each bucket and put in 10 drops of this stuff, he said. Then you stir it till it disappears. This optic white, that's it, as white as George Washington's Sunday go-to-meeting wig. White. It's the purest white that can be found. Nobody makes a paint any whiter. This batch right here is heading for a national monument. It's from The Invisible Man. A statue, building, or other structure erected to commemorate a famous or notable person or event. A fresh and lacerating, something that serves as a reminder of, or witness, or tribute to a way of life, attitude, achievement. Soft tissues of the body, socioeconomic disparities attest an enduring, memorable, outstanding, or imposing example of some quality, attribute, etc. License plates, stamps, national parks, cemeteries, water fountains, dams, bridges, roads, schools, state and city symbols, ships, holidays and observances, highways, barracks. A tomb, a sepulcher, obsolete. A piece of information given in writing, obsolete. At Eric's, the usual sesame beef, the chef's chicken with portobello mushrooms, one white, one brown rice, double parked out front, hair's breadth of a space so the J can pass, summer fog. You pick up to-go food at the back of the restaurant. It's an off-peak time. There are only 2 of us. A black woman is there ahead of me, a white woman. A Chinese waitress comes up. I give her my phone number. She turns to the kitchen, of which you can see a peak, gleaming white, steamy stacks of to-go cardboard cartons, scent of sauteed garlic, ginger. She is getting my food. A car honks outside. In the corner of my attention, I'm aware, I'm wondering, has the woman standing there been helped? The second hand on a clock moves. The waitress arrives with, I do not speak my thought into the room, its high ceilings. Fans gently whir. The woman was there when I entered before I arrived. My food, am in a hurry, probably. Her food isn't ready. Turning away my white plastic bag, I hear a waiter asking if she needs help. Having imagined, a white colleague says, you have racialized this. To the friends of color, think not. What dreams this pasty pablum, their beauty, whiteness, and shamefaced grace? A man who by his whiteness much resembled innocency at first blush. The Edmund Pettus Bridge, Jefferson Davis Highway, the Stone Mountain $50 with Lee and Jackson on horseback, printed by the U.S. Mint in 1925. Lee and Jackson on a 4-cent stamp issued in March of 1937. While dyers created the finest textiles, the dyers themselves were often considered unclean or pariahs. In the ancient Greek city-state of Sparta, dyers were not allowed to live within the city walls. The Romans, on the other hand, held their dyers in high esteem and considered them under the protection of the goddess Minerva, patroness of wisdom, craftwork, and medicine. An older gray-haired woman presses each breast between plastic panes, trying not to grip the handle as if having a strength test. Her foot on pedal controls the panel's descent. Now hold your breast between two panes, breast tissue dense. See the black on the screen? It is fat. You don't have much. As you get older, in your 60s, it will be all fat. She tells me about a mystery writer she likes. I can't recall his name. It was a he. Not that I was going to, but are you really listening as each breast is laid out and pressed as if dough for a loaf or pizza and squeezed? Can a person track details in such a situation? I am dressed and leaving. White fog swirls inside the slender outline of my breast. The tracery, a shape emerging as the wind shifts subtly. 3 years ago, I asked for a copy, expecting paper. The technician snuck me a copy on film. I should paste it up, my fog breast. My medicinal contraband, Chiaroscuro, hide it on my way out. Probably the most sought after color throughout history has been red. Red cloth has been the prized possession of the wealthy and powerful for thousands of years. Perhaps this explains why, in language after language, the word red is an ancient one, older than any other color terms, save black and white. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow at the Roxy.